The mechanic could taste blood in her mouth as she dragged herself across the sand, the wreck burning behind her. The heat searing her back, each breath tearing through her chest, like knives, her legs heavy as stone, but her will dragging her forward. Still, she lifted her head through smoke and saw the line of enemy soldiers advancing rifles, raised boots pounding against the desert floor, their shadows stretching long in the firelight, each step bringing them closer until she knew there was nowhere left to run. She pressed her palm into the sand, forcing herself upright, staggering onto her feet, though her body screamed to collapse. Her eyes locked onto the soldiers closing in. They spoke harshly, voices sharp with triumph, weapons leveled. At her heart she clenched her fists, though she carried no weapon. Her mind racing with fragments of memory, every bolt she had turned, every circuit she had mastered, every improvised fix that had kept machines alive if she could keep a bird in the sky when it should have fallen, then maybe she could survive this too. The leader of the enemy squad stepped forward, his weapon gleaming in the firelight, his eyes hard with the certainty of victory. He barked an order, and two men moved to seize her, their hands reaching out rough and unyielding, but she twisted back, stumbling yet striking with the force of desperation, her elbow crashing into one face, her boot slamming against the shin of another. She staggered free for a moment, long enough, to grab a shard of twisted metal from the wreck and raise it like a blade. The soldiers roared, anger flaring as they closed in around her, a ring of rifles trained on her chest. Yet she stood with the shard in her hand, her breath ragged her body, broken but her eyes defiant. She had lived her life fixing what others discarded. She had survived when no one expected her to rise. She would not bow now, not here, not ever. Her grip tightened, though her arm trembled, and for a heartbeat, the desert stilled as if holding its breath. Then the silence shattered with gunfire, not from the enemy, but from the ridge above. The SEALs had broken through their shadows, spilling into the chaos, rifles blazing precise and relentless, the enemy soldiers around. Her jerked and fell, the leader spinning in shock as his men collapsed. The mechanic dropped to her knees as sand erupted with bullets around her, the night filled with thunder. Once again, the SEAL captain's voice cutting through the storm hold. Your ground, move to her now. The SEALs surged forward, their formation unbreakable as they drove into the enemy line, their fire carving a path toward her position. The mechanic tried to rise, her legs trembling, but strength failing, her arms buckling. Beneath the weight of her body, she could only crawl inch by inch toward the sound of salvation. The enemy leader snarling orders as he rallied the last of his men, their rifles spitting fire in desperate fury, the desert becoming a crucible of blood and flame. She felt a hand grip her arm, rough, not friendly. Her body jerked back. The enemy leader towering over her, rage carved into his face. He dragged her upright, his weapon pressed against her side, using her body as a shield against the advancing SEALs! His shout echoing across the battlefield, hold fire or she dies. The SEALs froze for a heartbeat, their weapons locked on him, their captain's eyes narrowing with fury, but his voice cold, do not harm her, or you will not leave this desert alive. Mechanic gasped, her body sagging in the grip of the soldier, but her mind still whirring, searching for weakness. The shard of metal still clenched in her hand, hidden against her side, the firelight flickering across its edge. The enemy leader shifted, his stance dragging her backward step by step toward cover, barking orders to retreat with his prize, the SEALs advancing but cautious, unwilling to risk a shot while she was trapped in the line of fire. Her heart pounded, her ribs aching, her lungs burning, yet through the haze of pain, a thought crystallized, sharp and clear. She could not wait for rescue. She could not be the chain that held the SEALs back. If she was to be free, it would be by her own hand. She tightened her grip on the shard, her eyes narrowing as she measured the angle, the distance, the single desperate strike that might break his hold, even if it cost her everything. The captain saw her stance, change, his eyes widening with recognition. He gave the order, prepare to move, his men tightening their formation, their weapons ready to strike the moment the chance appeared. The desert seemed to still once again, the flames casting long shadows across the sand, the smoke rising heavy in the night, and in the center of it, all the mechanic poised on the knife edge of survival, her body broken, but her spirit unyielding. The mechanic felt the cold barrel pressed into her ribs, the enemy leader's arm locked around her chest, his breath harsh against her ear as he shouted. Threats into the night, his men scattering around him, their rifles spitting fire at the advancing SEALs. Her own pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the chaos, her body broken and trembling, but her mind sharpened into a single line of thought. This ends here. The shard of metal dug into her palm, slick with blood, her knuckles white as she gripped it tighter. Her eyes locked on the faint gap between his arm and his chest, the one weakness in his hold. The captain shouted orders from the ridge, his men spreading wide, preparing to strike the desert, echoing with explosions and cries. But all of it blurred as she focused on the moment, the beat between his breaths, the fraction of time where his grip slackened just enough for her to move. She twisted hard, driving the shard upward into his side, the jagged edge tearing through cloth and flesh, his scream raw and furious as his body jolted backward, his rifle firing wild into the night. She wrenched herself free, stumbling forward as pain ripped through her ribs, her vision spinning but freedom burning like fire in her veins. The SEALs reacted instantly, their rifles erupting in a storm of bullets cutting down the leader where he staggered, blood staining the sand as he fell. The battlefield erupted with chaos, the remaining enemy soldiers panicking at the fall of their commander, the SEALs pressing their advantage, driving them back with relentless precision. The mechanic collapsed to her knees, the shard slipping from her fingers, her hands clawing at the sand as the captain sprinted toward her, his shadow looming tall against the firelight, his voice sharp, medic, now his men closing around her, forming a shield of steel against the last desperate shots fired from the retreating enemy. She gasped for breath, her chest heaving, every rib aching, but her eyes still burned with defiance. She looked up into the captain's face. Sweat and soot streaked across his features, his jaw hard, but his eyes holding a glimmer of respect that cut deeper than words. You held them, he said, his voice low but steady. You held us all. She tried to answer, but only a ragged whisper escaped her lips. Not done yet, and her eyes drifted toward the horizon. The night was alive with echoes of retreating, engines, enemy survivors fleeing into the desert. But the danger was not gone. Reinforcements could come at any moment. The captain knew it, and so did she. His men worked fast, securing the area, tending to wounds, checking weapons. The medic crouched, by her side wrapping bandages across her ribs, his hands swift but gentle. She winced with every touch but refused to let pain own her. She had been a mechanic. She had been invisible, but tonight she had flown and fought and endured. The captain crouched, close his voice firm extraction. Inbound 5 minutes, we hold here until then. His men nodded their formation, tightening their weapons, trained outward, scanning the dunes. The mechanic leaned back against the wreckage of her bird, now a broken husk, still smoldering in the night. She touched the scorched metal, her fingers tracing the frame with something like reverence. This machine had carried her through fire, and though it had died, it had given her the sky one final time. The sound of helicopters grew louder, slicing through the desert wind, their rotors thundering a promise of survival. The SEALs signaled the landing zone, flares streaking upward to mark their position. The mechanic watched through heavy eyes, her body sagging with exhaustion, her veins still thrumming with adrenaline, her mind replaying every moment from the silence of the hangar to the chaos of the battlefield. How she had risen when no one else did, how she had proven that even those who are unseen can burn brighter than fire. The captain helped her to her feet, his arm steady beneath her as the helicopters descended, sand whipping around them, the air thick with dust. She stumbled but did not fall, her legs trembling but her spirit refusing to break. She climbed, Aboard the aircraft with the SEALs at her side, their faces hard, but their eyes flicking toward her with something unspoken gratitude and awe for the mechanic who had flown into war and shocked them all. The helicopters lifted, leaving behind smoke and flame and silence, the desert scarred by fire and blood. The mechanic leaned against the frame, her eyes closing for a moment as the cool rush of wind washed over her, the world fading into a haze, but inside her chest, a fire burned unextinguished. She was no longer only the keeper of machines. She was proof that courage could rise from anywhere, from anyone, even from the quietest corners of the base. She opened her eyes once more, staring into the horizon beyond the glass stars, sharp against the endless dark. Her reflection faint but fierce, staring back at her. She had been forged in steel and flame, and though the battle was over, she knew this was only the beginning, because the desert still whispered with danger, and her name would not be forgotten. The desert wind tore across the damaged fuselage as the mechanic wrestled with the controls, the aircraft shuddering beneath her hands, smoke trailing like a banner across the night sky, alarms flashing across her vision, each one screaming that the bird should already have fallen yet. Still, she held it steady because below the SEALs were locked in combat, and her distraction was their shield. The radio crackled with bursts of gunfire and sharp orders, the captain's voice cutting through. Chaos, enemy reinforcements, incoming, heavy vehicles, multiple gunners. They need suppression now, or they would be overrun. Her throat tightened, her body begged for rest, but her mind pushed forward because this machine was her life and she would not let it die while they fought on the ground. She banked hard, leveling the bird low over the desert floor, the smell of burning fuel heavy in her nose. Her vision blurred from smoke, but her hands found strength in familiarity. Every lever, every switch. Part of her like muscle memory carved from years of work. She opened fire across the convoy, the rounds slicing through armor and scattering enemy formations, the sky lit with explosions as vehicles burst into flame, their advance faltering for precious seconds. But the retaliation was swift and merciless. The enemy gunners turned their fire skyward, tracer rounds carving through the night, striking the wings, rattling the frame. One engine coughed a deep shudder before roaring back to life. She grit, her teeth pressing harder into the controls, forcing the aircraft to obey her command, though she knew the bird could not endure much longer. Still, she refused to break because the SEALs were counting on her. Below, shadows darted between the flames, the SEALs moving with precision, tearing through enemy lines. Yet even their strength was stretched thin. The convoy seemed endless waves of soldiers pouring from trucks, setting up heavy weapons, turning the desert into a killing ground. The mechanic felt every second press heavier on her chest, knowing their survival hinged on her ability to keep the sky a weapon in their favor. Her eyes caught movement on the horizon, a fresh column of lights growing brighter. Enemy reinforcements racing across. The dune's armored carriers bristling with weapons. She bit down on panic and turned her bird toward them, guns blazing, the desert exploding with fire as she struck their lead. Vehicles slowing the advance but drawing every weapon back toward her. The sky filled with missiles and bullets, her aircraft twisting through the storm, each dodge costing more strength from a frame already breaking. The captain's voice rang again, desperate but calm. "We are holding, but not for long. Buy us 2 more minutes. 2 minutes." She thought her arms screaming from strain, her lungs burning with smoke and fear. But she forced the bird into another dive, strafing the battlefield, her rounds scattering soldiers, giving the SEALs a chance to push forward her. Own breath ragged, her chest heaving, but her focus unbroken. Another missile streaked upward, faster, closer than the rest. The warning blared deafening inside the cockpit. She yanked the controls into a brutal roll, the explosion ripping across her. Sighed, the impact tearing through metal, the cockpit rattling with a force that nearly threw her from the seat. The bird groaned a final protest, its alarms wailing in unison. Her vision blurred as pain ripped through her ribs where she slammed against The harness, she tasted blood in her mouth, but her hands refused to let go. The aircraft dipped low, skimming the desert dangerously close, sand whipping across the cockpit glass. She fought to pull it higher, her muscles straining, every nerve screaming, as the damaged engine sputtered, then caught again. Her teeth clenched until her jaw ached, and finally the bird steadied, barely alive but still in the air. Her body sagged with relief for a moment until the radio crackled again, heavy armor rolling. In "We need fire now or they will break our line." Her eyes narrowed, sweat dripping into her eyes as she swung the aircraft around, angling for one more strike, though she knew the frame would not survive much more. She opened fire across the heavy, carrier's rounds sparking against armor until one erupted in flame, the blast lighting the desert. The enemy scrambled and broke formation, giving the SEALs another chance to advance. Yet the retaliation was merciless, a wall of fire cutting through, the sky hammering against her bird. The console lit red smoke filled the cockpit, her lungs choking, her arms trembling. She fought to keep the nose level, but every warning screamed failure, fuel bleeding, hydraulics failing. The bird would not last. Another pass still. She glanced toward the battlefield below, the SEALs surging through the chaos. Their mission unfinished, their lives bound to hers. She drew in one ragged breath and whispered, though no one could hear, "Not yet." She gripped the controls and forced the bird higher, dragging it into the sky above the battlefield. One last climb, one last chance. The frame shook violently, bolts snapping, panels tearing away, the desert shrinking below her. But her focus narrowed to a single point. The reinforcements gathering at the ridge beyond. She could hit them. She could scatter them, even if it meant never coming back. The decision burned through her chest as the alarms screamed louder, the bird fighting her with every second. The dive began, like a plunge into fire, the mechanic forcing the battered aircraft downward. Every alarm screaming in her ears, the desert spinning closer and closer. Tracer fire tearing past her cockpit, the frame shaking as if it would split apart at any second. Her grip was iron, her jaw locked tight, because she had made her choice. If the bird would die, it would die striking the enemy where it hurt the most. The ridge loomed ahead, crawling with reinforcements, heavy vehicles clustered in tight formation, soldiers scrambling to bring their weapons to bear. She angled the nose directly at the heart of their line, the console flashing red warning systems failing one after another, yet her eyes never wavered. She was the pilot now, no longer hidden in the hangar, no longer just grease and tools. She was fire and steel, and the desert roared its approval around her. Below, the SEALs fought through chaos, their captain looking up for a split second to see the streak of the aircraft descending like a star burning across the night. He understood without words what she intended, his chest clenched, but he barked orders. "Drive forward, use the brake she gives us," and his men surged with renewed ferocity, their blades of fire cutting through the stunned enemy, who dared to look skyward instead of at the shadows tearing into them. The mechanic yanked the release for her remaining payload, a desperate gamble, the bombs tumbling free just before the bird shuddered from a direct hit, the explosion behind, her ripping part of the wing away. She held the dive for one more breath, one more heartbeat before pulling with everything left in her arms, the bird groaning, metal shrieking, the nose lifting just enough as the payload struck the ridge. The desert erupted in a wave of fire, the ground convulsing with the force of the blast. Vehicles flipping, soldiers thrown screaming into the air, a chain of explosions tearing through their reinforcements, the shockwave hammering even the SEALs as they pressed. Forward, smoke and flame engulfed the ridge, turning night into day. The battlefield frozen for a moment by the sheer destruction raining from the sky. The aircraft, however, had given everything, the controls unresponsive, the frame breaking apart piece by piece. She fought to level it, her vision swimming from smoke, her chest heaving as if each breath were knives. She whispered, "Hold together, hold." But the bird no longer listened. Its spirit spent, its body torn by fire and metal. She knew the desert floor was racing up to claim her. She only had seconds left. Her hands still refused to let go. She pulled against the dead controls, the ground rushing close, the cockpit shaking violently, her harness biting deep into her shoulders. Yet a flicker of instinct born of endless hours in these machines sparked inside her. She spotted a stretch of open sand beyond the ridge, torn but clear if she could angle toward it. If she could just guide the bird a little further, she might not die here. Not yet. SEALs pressed forward through smoke, their ears ringing from the blast, their captain shouting over the chaos, "Keep moving. The reinforcements are broken. Push them back," but his eyes searched the sky, and he saw the trail of smoke carving downward. The aircraft spinning like a dying bird, his chest clenched, because he knew she had given them this chance, and perhaps it would be her last. He forced the thought away, because hesitation meant death. But inside his heart pounded with silent fury. Mechanic fought with everything. Left her body numb, her vision fading as sparks rained inside the cockpit. The ground rushed to meet her. She wrenched the controls to the side, forcing the bird to twist away from jagged rock toward the strip of sand. It bucked hard, the engine screaming its last cry before silence filled the cabin. Her breath caught her stomach lurched, and then the world exploded in impact. Metal tore and sand erupted as the bird skidded across the desert, gouging deep scars in the earth. Her body slammed against the harness pane, tearing through her ribs, her head ringing with thunder, but the frame held long enough to slow the descent before shattering into stillness. Smoke rising in heavy clouds. She hung in the seat barely, conscious, the taste of blood sharp on her tongue, the desert spinning around her. Yet she was alive, though. For how long, she could not know. On the battlefield, the SEALs carved through the remnants of the convoy. Their captain's voice steady even. As his heart raged, enemy lines collapsing, reinforcements scattered, victory within reach. Yet he could not silence the thought of the mechanic lying broken somewhere beyond the ridge. He pressed his men harder, finishing. The hangar was quiet except for the steady hum of fans overhead and the clinking of tools against steel. The mechanic sat cross-legged beneath the wing of an old bird, her hands stained with grease and her mind set on the small details of the machine. She loved the engines, always told the truth. They either roared alive or stayed silent. They never lied, unlike people, unlike the world around her. The SEAL team had landed earlier that day, their boots loud against the tarmac, their voices rough from missions that no one on base dared ask about. The mechanic had watched them from the shadows, their presence filling the air like a storm on the horizon. She never belonged in their circle. She was background noise, the quiet figure who kept the planes. Alive and never asked for thanks, though. In truth, she never expected any, as the evening settled and the desert heat cooled into a sharp biting wind. The announcement came sudden and heavy, the SEAL captain's voice booming through the command tent. Any combat pilots, he called the words, echoing across the base, carried by urgency and fire. Something was happening. Something bigger than repairs or maintenance, something that demanded lives on the line. The mechanic felt her stomach tighten as the silence stretched because no one stepped forward. The pilots had already been deployed or lost to missions too far from reach. The base was stripped thin. Only engineers and support left behind. The captain's eyes swept the crowd, searching, waiting for a hand to rise, but none. Did his jaw set hard, frustration flashing across his face. The mechanic gripped her wrench tighter, her pulse drumming in her ears, because the thought forming inside her head was impossible, yet it refused to be silenced. She had spent years beneath wings and inside cockpits. She knew the aircraft better than anyone on base. Every wire, every gauge, every shadow of its flight path. She had studied manuals not meant for. Her eyes listened to pilots talk when they thought. She was not paying attention. She had even flown short tests under the cover of maintenance protocols, though never in combat, never with lives hanging from her skill. But now the weight of the silence pressed heavier than fear. The captain repeated the call, his voice louder, harsher. This time, any combat pilots, we need you. Now the room shifted uneasily. Men and women avoiding his gaze, knowing none of them could answer. The mechanic's throat burned, her legs stiff, but something inside her broke through the wall of doubt, and she rose slowly, her coveralls streaked with oil, her face shadowed with determination. She said nothing, but the motion alone silenced. The room, eyes turned, disbelief flickered across faces. The mechanic who never spoke, beyond what was necessary, the one always bent over tools and engines, was standing now answering a call meant for warriors. The SEAL captain's gaze locked onto hers, surprise flashing before being buried beneath the urgency of the moment. He asked, quietly, "Are you telling me you can fly?" And she nodded once. No hesitation in her eyes, only a quiet fire that refused to fade. For a moment, the tent held its breath, the air heavy with shock and uncertainty. Someone scoffed under their breath. Another whispered, "She is just a mechanic." But the captain raised a hand, silencing them all. He studied her face, searching for weakness, for hesitation, and finding none. Though his voice was steel, his eyes carried a flicker of respect. "Then prove it," he said, because doubt was a luxury they could not afford, and the mission would not wait. The mechanic followed him out into the night, the runway stretching endless under the stars, the aircraft waiting like beasts ready to be unleashed. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She ran through the pre-flight checks faster than thought, every motion smooth, every connection exact, as if she had done this 1,000 times, though in truth she had only lived it in fragments and in dreams. The captain watched from the side, his men tense, his decision hanging in the balance. She slid into the cockpit, the seat familiar and foreign all at once, her fingers brushing over controls she had memorized long ago. She powered the systems one by one, the hum of engines growing louder until it filled the night air with thunder. The ground shook and the bird came alive, and for the first time the SEALs realized this was no bluff, no trick, no desperate illusion. The mechanic was a pilot hidden in plain sight. The captain leaned close to his men, his voice low but clear. "We may have found our answer," though he did not finish the thought, because above the roar of engines, the alarm blared again, sharper, more urgent than before the mission had escalated. The threat closer than anyone believed, and now there was no turning back. The mechanic felt the vibration of the engines tremble through her body as the aircraft surged forward across the runway, the desert night rushing past her in a blur of sand and shadow. Her grip on the controls was tight, but not clumsy. Every motion guided by memory and instinct, honed from years of silent study. Yet this was no test run. This was no idle dream. The weight of the SEALs seated behind her was real, and the urgency in their captain's voice was carved deep into her mind. The wheels lifted free of the earth, and the bird rose into the darkness, the stars opening wide above them like a map to destiny. She steadied the climb, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her eyes locked forward, steady clear. The cabin behind her filled with low murmurs, the SEALs' murmurs of disbelief and tension, for they had placed their fate in the hands of someone who had never worn wings yet, now guided them into the jaws of fire. The radio crackled with clipped transmissions. Enemy movement confirmed a convoy rolling through the desert, armed and reinforced. The mission was not rescue but interception, a strike meant to cut the head off a serpent before it reached Allied lines. The SEAL captain leaned toward her, his voice calm yet urgent. "Can you bring us down on target?" she answered without turning her head. Yes, though in truth, her chest burned with doubt. She had flown, but never into war, never under fire, yet still. She pressed the throttle because hesitation was death. The aircraft sliced through the night. The desert stretched endless below, shadows of ridges and dunes flickering in the moonlight. The mechanic scanned her instruments, every number, every gauge exact and precise, her mind calculating angles of descent, wind speed, distance to target. She had lived her life among these machines. They were her language, her truth. And now she spoke it with unshakable clarity. Though behind her the SEALs whispered disbelief, the captain's silence told her all she needed to know. Trust had been given, and now must be earned. The first flash split the sky, sudden and violent. A streak of fire racing upward, a missile launched from the sands below. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. Warning of lock on her pulse spiked, but her hands moved with precision, rolling the aircraft into a dive. The missile streaking past their wing, close enough to rattle the frame. The SEALs swore behind her, gripping their harnesses. But she felt her body flow with the motion, as if she had prepared her entire life for this moment. Another missile rose, and again she banked sharp, the desert floor rushing close before she pulled them back into the sky. Her jaw tightened, sweat dripping down her brow as the sky lit with enemy fire. The convoy below had anti-air batteries hidden among the vehicles, and they were already zeroing in. The captain's voice rang behind her. "Drop us closer. We need to hit them fast." Her throat was dry, but she answered with steady words. "Hold on." She cut the throttle, angled hard, and dove again, the desert rushing up the lights of the convoy, bright specks against the darkness. She leveled them out just above the sand, skimming low beneath. The arcs of tracer fire that burned overhead.